What's going on, everyone? Today we have the RTX 5050. This is the gigabyte gaming version. It's got 8 gigs of VRAM. We're going to be pairing it today with the 14600K and 32 gigs of RAM. We're going to be going through this title layer by layer and checking out all the different settings to ensure that you get the best visual fidelity at the best possible frame rate. With all that out of the way, if you get something out of this, please consider subscribing by clicking that little button down there at the bottom, and let's jump into the video. All right, welcome. We are on the lowest preset right now. We are rocking 4139 FPS. We do not have any upscaling enabled, no ray tracing, of course, and we're not doing any frame generation. This is the 5050. So this is the lowest cost card that gives you access to all the latest DLSS stuff and multi-frame generation and all that kind of thing. So it's worth taking a look at. You know, you might be considering something ultra budget like this, and we're just going to see what we can do in a game that is quite demanding still. So let's just jump over to the settings and see what we can do here. I do have a little bit of a nasal issue, so just ignore me with that. But all right, so right now we're just on DLSS 100% scaling. So what I would probably do is just come through here and go with at least 67. We're going to do a little bit of upscaling. And of course, let's check out our resolution. We're at 1920 by 1080. I think it would be hilarious to try to go up from this, but you know, we're starting with a realistic application here. All right, so that gives you 60 FPS. Now again, this is the lowest possible preset with no ray tracing. So yes, you can get 60 FPS, but it does leave a lot to be desired. As you can see, all the textures are quite flat. The water does look nice, but we do have a little bit of odd flickering and that kind of thing, so we might need to introduce a little bit more DLSS. This title does have a weird thing with what DLSS setting you're on, and gives it a little bit of shimmering, or you know, even just like some kind of hallucinogenic effects, really. I mean, it's just kind of like sparkling, and you know, the screen seems to shake a little bit. So I'm going to go up to medium, and we're just shooting from the hip here because I don't really know what this title is going to behave like on this particular game. There's that crazy thing that this does. Let me see if I can get it to settle in. Yeah, it likes to jump around here. All right, so no frame generation. That's what this X little symbol means. I had to look it up, but we're not frame generating, which we will explore that later on, because I think some frame generation would really make this title more playable, of course, on this card. Now this is medium preset. Again, we're leaving that DLSS alone because we're not going to kid ourselves, right? This is a 50-50 after all. All right, so this is a 4955 FPS experience here. Not the greatest looking, but you know, it could be worse. We could not be, you know, anywhere near this playable. But as far as like 1080p goes, this card will probably be viable for this title with some really with some concessions. You know, nothing too crazy, I don't think, but I'm just trying to see what this title can do with a card that is, you know, arguably budget. I mean, you know, should it cost what it costs? I don't know. That's for you to decide, but I'm just, you know, this is just a demo, an example. I'm not advocating for this card or any other card on any of my videos, so, you know, just take that for what it is. But, yeah, so 56 FPS here. All right, so let's jump in here and go to graphics. So let's see what the high preset can do. Again, we're not doing any ray tracing right now. We're going to explore it, but, yeah, we're going to see how long it takes for this card to fall apart. I don't think that gunning for exactly 60 FPS is something that's going to be super realistic without frame generation. So we're going to call it like maybe a 40 FPS experience would be a nice target before we do frame generation. This game is a slower paced title. It's you know, kind of going through the environment, an adventure game, so you don't necessarily need a native all natural 60 FPS. You can fudge it a little bit with some frame generation. It usually gives you a little bit of a snag right here. I want to see if we go through here without a snag. There it is. There's a little snag. I don't know. It's just that area. You saw the frame time graph kind of like pop up weird. All right, so let's just keep going here and see what the very next preset can do for us. Sorry, my voice sounds so full. I'm still getting over whatever medieval virus I had last week. But yeah, anyway, so this drops us down to 34 FPS. Now, this is probably where I would say we need to introduce a little bit more DLSS to get that frame rate up a little bit more, be a little bit more stable. You know, and not dip down into the 30s. That's a little bit uncomfortable. But, you know, playable, yes. Setting your expectations, of course. You can play this game with this card and have a pretty good time, I believe, and not destroy your budget. You know, you could pair this is paired with a 14600K with a little bit more realistic pairing. You know, these 14600s, these i5s are starting to come down in price. They're the better purchase if you want to go Intel, in my opinion. You know, because let's face it, the new Intel chips aren't terribly cheap, and they're not terribly impressive when it comes to gaming. They're impressive in other ways, but, you know, not gaming. So the 14600 is a pretty good chip to pair with this for the money. So that's why I chose this particular build that I have to do this test with. All right, so let's just drop down this DLSS. Let's go straight to performance, leaving everything else alone. As you can see, we're still on very high. It's giving us a bunch of warnings, but let's just check it out, see what it does. All right, so that gives us up to about 48 FPS, right under 50, just shy of it. All right, so let's go up to the very next preset. Again, this is no ray tracing. I'm not sure if ray tracing is going to be viable, but it might be with some concessions, like I said. You want to make sure that you're setting your expectations whenever you're, you know, buying a budget GPU like this. You know, I did put a poll out to see if anybody wanted to see this particular GPU, and the response was that people did want to see it. So I did, you know, go out and push some pennies across the table and get me a copy of it. So anyway, let's jump over here and see what the very next graphics preset will do for us. I'm just going to make sure that everything is still the same. We're not making any sort of weird adjustments. So 50, yep, there we go. Cinematic, no ray tracing still. Frame gen is off. All right, so let's just apply that and jump back over here. So this is the cinematic setting with performance DLSS. We've got 39 FPS though. I mean, it's respectable for what this card is kind of made to do. As you can see, our VRAM is very managed. That's pretty impressive that we're not getting anywhere near that 8 gigs of VRAM on this card. So this title doesn't really eat VRAM like some of the other titles do. It actually has pretty decent VRAM management. So, you know, for the most part, this would be a halfway decent experience. Now, I will say that this is at 1080p. I would not go any higher than 1080p on this card. It's just, it would probably implode. But let's come in here and let's see what else we can do. Okay, so we can turn on frame gen and see what that does. So the frame generation is on. That's just on right there. And we go 2x, 3x, 4x. Let's just go with 2x because this is like some sort of automatic thing. All right, so 2x, and let's see what we can do there. It's going to eat a little bit of VRAM, but we do have enough of it. So that jumped up to 7.3 of allocation and 6.1 of used. And that gives us right at 60 FPS. Now it is a generated 60. You know, we're adding about 20 additional frames to our 40 FPS experience. But again, it can be done. And what you can notice about these the VRAM allocation when it comes to frame generation is generally once you go 2x, 3x, and 4x don't necessarily equate to you know, equal amount of VRAM usage. It might go up a hair, but for the most part, it's worth it to just go to that 4x and just see what you can do there. I mean, you can go to 3x, and I'm just going to see here. So we're at 6.9. I'm going to go ahead and apply that. Let's see if it goes up at all. Hopefully my theory holds true. Yeah, it just went up a tiny bit, 7.1, which is about honestly where it was at 2x. And that gives us about 80 FPS here. And responsiveness is, it's okay. I'm going to actually turn on my frame view and then come back, and we'll see kind of how the responsiveness is handling this title. All right, so we're back at it here. Frame view unfortunately will not cooperate, so we're just going to keep going, and you're just going to have to trust me on my mouse movements here. Frame view can be quite finicky, so we're just going to keep going with the test here. But for the most part, it feels pretty good. You know, could I play this on a controller? Absolutely. With a mouse and keyboard, you might need to switch over to controller if you're not opposed to that. But for the most part, it does feel okay. We're at 75 FPS here. This title is totally playable. Now, that is, you know, that is with that 3X. Let's go ahead and apply that 4X and see what that does. Now, that gives us 95 FPS. Our allocated VRAM went up just a very, very tiny amount. That gives us about 100 FPS, and actually it looks really good. You know, of course, you know, the frame generation is doing most of the framework here. You do get some little bit of if you look closely across, there's some horizontal issues here, but you know, this is a budget card and it gives you access to 4X frame generation. So if you're not opposed to that, the DLSS combined with the frame generation can give you a pretty good experience that you really can't find on another card of this price point. Yeah, you can find other cards that cost about this, especially in the used market, like a 3060 or something like that. But yeah, you're just not going to get the 4X frame generation baked into titles and that kind of stuff. So it definitely has a unique place in the budget GPU market. I'll put it that way. It is unique. I'm not advocating for it. Make your own decision. Like I always say, everything's completely personal when it comes to these settings. So with that said, let's just jump over and just introduce a little bit of ray tracing. And I'm going to do a restart, and then we'll see what we can get to with ray tracing enabled and see what it takes to, you know, hopefully not destroy anything. So yeah, we're going to apply that and do a restart, and we'll see you in a second. All right, so we are back, and I have the frame generation turned off. We are fully cinematic with the ray tracing on low. So right here we are at 21 FPS. We still have the DLSS set on performance. So we're going to have to make some concessions, some big concessions to get it to run this ray tracing. So what we want to do is I want to try to target about a 40 FPS threshold. You know, try to get it up to 40 FPS with this ray tracing set to low before we turn on any frame generation. And then we're going to also hope that we have enough VRAM to handle it. So we're going to go down to medium and see what that does. Low looks pretty bad. So medium is about where visually it starts to look like a proper title. All right, so that gives us 31 FPS. So this is about a console target, which is not ideal by any means. But remember, the MSRP on this card is quite low, considering the cards that have been coming out recently. You know, so if you really want to try to use some frame generation from this point, I think possibly a 2X would get the job done. To be a playable experience, you might not get that 60, but you might be able to get something that's worthwhile. Let's just jump in here and see what the graphics settings can do for us as far as frame generation goes at 2X. So we're just going to go 2X here. We've got the VRAM to do it. Yeah, the VRAM is really not liking this at all because it actually looks worse. The actual pacing of these frames are quite bad, and it feels a lot more choppy than it did without the frame generation. So I'm going to call this title with ray tracing just not doable because we're on the low preset, and yeah, it's just not going to work unless you're willing to go harder on your DLSS, which we can check that out. What if we just go all the way down to ultra performance? Let's go back to have that frame generation be off, and let's see what medium does here. Again, low ray tracing, medium graphics preset with the DLSS on ultra performance. All right, that gives us 43, 42 FPS. The image is a little bit grainy, just a hair. Tolerable, I think. I don't think it's like the end of the world, but just calling that out that I am on a 32-inch monitor with this in 1920 by 1080. So, you know, I mean, it's definitely more stretched out than what like a 20-inch or 22-inch 1080p monitor would look like. So you might have a little bit better experience with that smaller monitor because it's going to tighten up those pixels and make it not look so stretched out. But this is 45 FPS before frame generation. Now, if I look at our VRAM, we're at 6.8. Hopefully, we'll have enough VRAM to do a little bit of frame generation and see what that can do. I'm going to go 2x here, and then we're just going to leave everything else alone. So ray tracing at low, the DLSS is set to ultra performance, and then medium across the board here. So, okay, there we go. I've got my PCL working here, thank goodness. All right, so we're going to bring that back. Now that we've implemented a little bit of frame generation, we're going to see what that PCL really is. All right, so 95 milliseconds, not the most ideal. You want it to be around 50 or so. That's kind of like where I like to aim for. But, you know, again, taking into consideration, you are doing a little bit of ray tracing, medium graphics preset, and you're running ultra DLSS, which arguably doesn't look that bad, and you're at 65 FPS. All right, so you are pretty much using every bit of your VRAM though, but I really would like to see what 4X does because, you know, if it doesn't eat up all the VRAM, it might be worth going and throwing in that 4X. And then I just want to keep an eye on what our PCL is doing. All right, so that will measure our latency. So our PCL is quite high. As you can see, it is about 84 FPS. Now on a controller, you would probably be okay. You know, I don't think that it would be something that would like necessarily keep you from enjoying this game. But, you know, you're going to have to pull out every single one of NVIDIA's, you know, extras. You're going to have to use DLSS. You're going to have to use frame generation. You're going to have to, you know, keep your ray tracing on the lowest setting if you want to use ray tracing. This is how I would run it personally. I'm going to flip over to the settings and I'm going to jump in here and I would run it exactly like this based on kind of like what I've been able to see. I would go with a 50% on our super resolution, so performance setting. I'm going to go without any frame generation at the moment. I'll probably wind up turning it on. I'm just going to say no ray tracing is possible, and then I'm going to go up to a very high preset. I'm going to do a restart and come back and see where that lands with everything. All right, so that puts me right at that 45 FPS mark that I was hoping to get to. You know, I think anything beyond that is kind of unrealistic without really giving up a lot of, you know, kind of things that would be nice to have. There is a dip down in the 30s though. So I would maybe look at coming in here. I set that up just so I could have a spot to jump from. So we're on DLSS 50 here. Let's go with, we might need to go with that medium. Ray tracing, of course, needs to be left off. Frame generation is off at the moment. And that performance DLSS still keeps things nice and sharp and crispy. Yeah, that's a little bit better. So, you know, if you do want to go with the medium, you're going to have a 60 FPS experience, but you just cannot do any ray tracing. That's just part of the deal. You can frame generate, though, because you're right around 60, and you have a good bit of VRAM left over. So we might need to just look at doing some of that frame generation and just see what that does. Okay, so let's go 2x here and just see what that does here. Okay, so it used a little bit more VRAM, but you know, you're at 83 FPS. This is a more traditional way to play it. You've got, you know, medium settings, no ray tracing. You are using DLSS set to performance, and you got 80 FPS once you enable that that 2x frame generation. You could go up 3x, 4x. You know, you got the VRAM to do it. You've actually got a little bit more VRAM available. So let's see what the next little setting up can do. I'm just curious if we can push it up to that high preset, and let's see what a base is for that. So let's turn that off. So let's see what a base frame rate would be. Oh man, that makes the textures just look so much better going up. I would probably say this is how I would play it, because that ground texture and stuff just looks a lot more realistic whenever you jump up to this preset, yeah, of high. So yeah, let's look up here, go over here. So that's high, and you know, you could definitely come in here and do a little bit of frame generation from that. You have enough frames for a game like this to do that. So let's go run through it. DLSS 50%, so performance DLSS. Frame generation set to 2x. Ray tracing is totally off, and a graphics preset of high at 1080p. All right, and that gives you 70 FPS here. Now your PCL is right around 57, and that's just because we've got a decent base frame rate. It's not 50 milliseconds all the time, but it is absolutely playable. I mean, this is nothing that I would hesitate to, you know, play through the game like this, especially if I had invested, you know, a little bit into a budget PC. This would be a budget PC GPU. So maybe you got an old, you know, 10 or 11 series CPU laying around with a motherboard you haven't touched, you know, throwing this in there. Even with, you know, some of those older CPUs, I feel like it would do okay. This, again, is an i5. It is a pretty balanced system at the moment. The CPU could probably even go down. You could probably go down to an i3, to be honest, or something equivalent on the AMD side. But yeah, I mean, this is something that you can definitely get away with and play through this type of game with if you are willing to make some concessions and, you know, set your expectations accordingly. Hopefully this has been informative. My goal with these is to help you make informed decisions with your GPU purchases, especially if you're considering building a new system. So hopefully this has been, you know, something you can get some value out of. If you have, please drop me a subscription and a like. That would be amazing, and we will see you in the very next one. Peace.